serve for 3 years up to the 9th of February 2024, I believe that should be. Cabinet submission also recommended that the existing appointed members should continue to serve, as I said, up until 2024. Cabinet also endorsed their recommendation for the following persons to be appointed to the Board of Commissioners of the Public Procurement Commission by the Governor General for a period of 4 years in accordance with the effective date as specified in their instruments of appointment. These are Ms. Lisa Diana Rooms, Ms. Sasha Lawrence Rose, Mr. Raymond Cooper, and Mr. Vernon Barrett. Existing members, including Mr. Raymond McIntyre and Mr. David Barrett, will continue to serve up until the 31st of March 2024 and the 17th of May 2024, respectively. As it relates to cabinet approvals, Cabinet gave approval for overseas travel by a delegation led by the Minister of Labor and Social Security, the Honorable Carl Samuda, to participate in the opening of a new office for the liaison service in Nova Scotia in Canada from the 7th of June to the 10th of June 2023. He is also to attend and deliver Jamaica's statement at the 111th session of the International Labour Conference in Geneva, Switzerland, from the 10th of June to the 16th of June this year. Approval was also given for a delegation led by Minister Samuda to attend the 12th Sub-Regional International Labour Organization meeting of Caribbean Labour Ministers in Georgetown, Guyana, from the 23rd to the 25th of May, 2023, and also gave approval for that travel. In terms of approval, Cabinet also gave approval for the payment of a quota increase by the government of Jamaica to the tune of $72,000 to the Caribbean Public Health Agency, that is CARFA, with effect from January 2023. Finally, in relation to contracts, approval was given for the renewal of insurance placement for the Airports Authority of Jamaica for the third and final triennium contract for the period the 1st of May 2023 to the 30th of April 2024, in keeping with the endorsement of the Public Service Commission. This insurance placement was done by brokers Fraser Fontaine and Kong, who recommended General Accident Insurance Company Limited and Lloyd's Syndicate Chaucer as follows. Placement in US denominated policies, $411,173 US. Placement in Jamaican determined policies, $1,405,981. Cabinet also approved the contract by the Port Authority for the provision of real estate development, planning and design consultancy services for the PAJ's 12-acre property in Montego Bay, St. James, and in keeping with the endorsement of the Public Services Commission. The award of the contract in the amount of $190 million, including general consumption tax, was done to Harold Morrison Robert Woodstock Associates Limited. And finally, Cabinet approved the award of a contract by the National Water Commission for the supply and delivery of 200 millimeter and 150 millimeter nominal diameter ductile iron pipes and associated fittings for the Anchovy Water Supply Project in St. James. And this includes Shuttlewood to Mount Carey and Nelson Tank pumping units. In keeping with the endorsement from the Public Procurement Commission, the award of contract in the amount of $132,296,000, inclusive of GCT, to the benefit of Derek A. Gibson Limited. Those are the decisions, board appointments, and the contract approvals by Cabinet, most recent. I will now invite the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation to attend upon the podium to give a presentation. Just want to give a slight overview. The government has had a strong focus on the development of water infrastructure over the last 7 years. Minister Samuda has been making the rounds across the island, opening numerous water facilities. These openings could not have taken place without significant work by the National Water Commission and budgeting support by the government of Jamaica. There are many communities in Jamaica who have not had water for many decades, but who are now in a position to benefit from potable water. As Mr. Samuda makes his way towards the podium, I just want to reiterate that the National Water Commission continues to make improvements, as it was recently announced that they were able to through their various initiatives, for the first time in many decades, have a profit. I'll now invite Minister Samuda to attend upon the podium to give his presentation. Minister Samuda.
Good morning to members of the media who are with us in person and those joining online. Allow me to acknowledge colleague minister without portfolio from OPM in charge of information, Minister Morgan, Press Secretary Naomi Francis, senior team from the NWC, WRA, and indeed the Met Services. I thank Minister Morgan for the opportunity to provide an update through this press conference, or press briefing rather, to address the current meteorological drought which Jamaica is experiencing. With us, as mentioned in my welcome, are members from agencies within MEGJEC, including the Met Services, WRA, and NWC. They are supported by senior members of staff of MEGJEC. It is well known that Jamaica's biomodal rainfall patterns consist of two peak periods with higher values of rainfall and corresponding periods of lower rainfall. The primary peak occurs in October and secondary peak in May. During the period February to March and the month of July, the lowest amounts of rainfall are typically experienced. This is based on long-term reports. However, as we know, deviations from the pattern do occur from year to year. It is no secret that Jamaica is in the throes of the worst drought since 2014. Jamaica started experiencing reduced rainfall from as early as October last year. However, the reduction in rainfall worsened after that. In November of 2022, we experienced 62% of our 30-year average in rainfall. In December, that declined to 47%. In January 2023, that figure declined to 32% of 30-year rainfall. In February, it declined further again to 28% of our 30-year average in rainfall. Now, there was some rebound in March where we received 90% of 30-year rainfall, but this is not necessarily evenly spread. The eastern section of the island had no parish receiving more than 60% of its 30-year rainfall. And to note, St. Thomas and Portland, and indeed Kingston, started seeing reductions in 30-year rainfall from as far back as August of last year. So I think that has to be understood, and that has to set the context for the issue that we face. In February of this year, the Prime Minister provided a comprehensive update on the situation and detailed the government's response. The Met Service and NWC teams are here to field questions this morning for technical issues. We have presentations that we can share with members of the media that have particular statistics, some which would be too laborious to go through this morning, but the teams are here to field specific questions. The fact is, when you have a month where you get 28% of 30-year rainfall, all water systems are impacted, and impacted severely. There is no country in the world, there is no state in the US that is unaffected when they have rainfall in this level. However, the government did not sit back and not respond. In February, persons should recall that the Prime Minister instructed that $150 million be made available for drought mitigation. That was broken down as follows. $35 million went to the Ministry of Local Government to facilitate trucking by municipalities. This is ongoing. $20 million was made available for the purchase of black tanks to support communities worst affected. $95 million was made available to NWC for trucking within the utility footprint and to critical infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, health centers, post offices, and police stations. This process is ongoing. The drought response, however, did not stop there. It took into consideration the impact on our farmers and understanding that they too were particularly badly impacted. Through the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, $110 million was also made available for drought mitigation. That process is ongoing, and I understand the intent is to increase it, but I'll allow Minister Charles to touch on that at a later date. These programs have indeed eased much of the pressure in many of the communities nationally. It is to be noted, and as previously stated, this is not the be-all. This was the initial emergency response as allocated at the end of last fiscal year. It is the intention of the ministry to convene the Drought Management Committee early next week to do an assessment, looking at all the stakeholders within the Integrated Water Management Council to ensure that we have a full feel of which systems have recovered, which have not, and what the impact of the current mitigation measures are. After that meeting, I intend to report to the Cabinet, and if there is need for stronger conservation measures, we will recommend it to the Cabinet. If there is need for increased allocations, we will make the request to the Ministry of Finance, but that will be post our Drought Management Committee meeting of next week. We are pleading, ladies and gentlemen, I will ask the members of the media to assist us with this plea. We are pleading with citizens to be circumspect with their use of the precious commodity at this time. We're asking you to desist from watering lawns and certainly to desist from washing cars for now. Now, what should also be clear, ladies and gentlemen, is that the climate is indeed changing. Our weather patterns are indeed shifting, and some have shifted. Just this morning, I saw an article posted where even trade in the Panama Canal is now being affected because of drought. The lakes that supply the fresh water in that space are lower than normal. Jamaica is not being spared. We can expect longer periods of intense drought and indeed periods of intense rainfall. This is precisely why this government has been investing at an unprecedented rate, certainly in the infrastructure of our water sector. This is targeted at improving resilience and the capacity of the varying agencies, and we are working around the clock to ensure that this is indeed realized. It is important to note, and especially in the context of drought, colleagues and members of the media should recall that I believe it was in November of last year that the NWC added 8 new trucks to its fleet to facilitate the resilience by increasing its trucking capacity. This year, the NWC will purchase a further 8. That will carry our fleet, I believe, to 32. Now, trucking is always a last-ditch effort and done in times of crisis. It is the least efficient, rather, method of getting water to persons. So it is done when we absolutely have to, when you're doing work in a community, when there is fallout from drought or other such issues. But this isn't the be-all and end-all. It is well known and documented that there are communities which are disproportionately affected by not being within the utility footprint. The drought is also now affecting these communities disproportionately because they don't have reliable water through their rainwater harvesting efforts or from the springs that they draw from. We can expect with current rainfall levels that there still will be further impact on small systems, many of which run by municipalities, several of which just done at a community level. It is for this reason the Prime Minister in his budget speech announced that 50,000 black tanks will be made available to citizens in areas most in need over the next 3 years. We have updated the country, I think recently, that 13,000 of these tanks, we will commence distribution of that in July. Now, these tanks will simply not just be given out, and we will come with a full detailed program at the time of program launch. But to note, it will be accompanied with the appropriate guttering to facilitate rainwater harvesting. We will be facilitating training of community individuals to do installation and providing a stipend to them in partnering with the Heart and Hope program. This program will significantly increase the water resilience, especially in communities outside of the utility footprint of the NWC and in communities affected by some of the oldest infrastructure that we have that affects their delivery. Last year, the NWC invested 4 billion Jamaican dollars. That was invested in communities across the length and breadth of Jamaica. The map can be provided to any members of the media who wish to use it. That was unprecedented. And it is for that reason we were not forced to commence lock-offs last year with the declining rainfall. There are two projects I'd like to highlight this morning before I describe the Capital Works program, which will support further resilience. The first is one that I think the NWC is very proud to have gotten it to this point. Last year, December, I think the first week in December, we signed a contract for the development of a water treatment plant at Content St. Catherine. This plant will commence construction in July of this year. To note, it will provide 15 million gallons of water to the corporate area daily. That would be sufficient that when complete, if you have a drought of this level, of this nature, with this level of rainfall, you would not have water disruption in supply in Kingston and St. Andrew, nothing of any consequence. This is a major national investment that the NWC, through a PPP, will make into the resilience in the water supply of Kingston, St. Andrew, and indeed soon to be parish of Portmore. So that is investment one that takes into consideration the climate that we face, or the changing climate that we face. Investment number two, which is particularly important and one that I believe ultimately the NWC will even have to do academic study to support other developing nations on, is the NRW efforts that have been made. The NRW program, which started, I believe, in late 2015, would have cut leaks and cut non-revenue water in Kingston from 71% to 38%. And correct me if I'm wrong, VP, in 2015, Kingston was using 50 million gallons of water per day, give or take. Before the drought started, Kingston and St. Andrew was using 35 million gallons of water a day, meaning we had stopped the leaks and theft of over 15 million gallons a day. It is for that reason, again, why we didn't have to have lock-offs for Christmas, why we didn't start strict measures in January. So the investments in capital infrastructure are adequately preparing the country to deal with the extended periods of drought that will come. Now, there are other initiatives and some major ones that the Prime Minister would have announced, including the Mahogany Vale Dam, which will significantly increase the resilience in the eastern end of the island. It also includes the Pedro Plains Irrigation Project, which will significantly increase the resilience in southern St. Elizabeth and indeed southern Manchester for farmers in those areas. But what I'm getting at, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, is that this investment program is underway, has been underway for some time, and we will indeed build in the resilience that we need to deal with drought conditions going forward. No, it's not an overnight fix. We know there's been a chronic level of underinvestment in the NWC over the last 40 years. We are correcting that. The management team and board of NWC are working around the clock to correct many of the issues that precede their tenure there. We do note that because of the drought and because of the aging infrastructure, there have been some challenges in recent times. We ask citizens for their understanding, and we assure them that we are working around the clock. But more importantly, we're investing the revenue of NWC and indeed tax dollars to ensure that this resilience is built in and that eventually this is a thing of the past. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. May we now have the NWC, who I believe will also be doing a presentation, and of course the Met Service, followed by Ministers Morgan and Samuda, who will be able to answer questions. NWC.
Thank you, Naomi. I think we will take questions first But we have also a presentation loaded up by Mr. Evan Thompson. So you can come forward and do the presentation, Mr. Thompson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning to everyone. I just want to inform everyone about some of the information that Minister Samuda mentioned just now. First of all, he has pointed out the fact that over the past month, we've seen rainfall that is still in many areas below normal, but we have seen that we have been rebounding to some extent in the month of March with respect to our drought situation. Rainfall for March was not as bad as it could have been. And so we take some comfort in the fact that we did receive some additional rainfall. If we look at the period from October of 2022 until March of 2023 and compare that to what is normal for Jamaica, what we recognize is that in October, whereas a normal Jamaica would experience about 235 millimeters of rainfall, we only experienced 185 millimeters. But it got worse, whereas in November, 176 millimeters would have been normal, and we experienced 118. Going into December, normally it would drop to about 115 millimeters of rainfall for the island. We actually received 57. So that was, as Minister mentioned, just about 50% of the rainfall that we would normally receive. And then in January, that's when it got even more critical, because an average year would have 103 millimeters of rainfall. And what we experienced in Jamaica was only 33 millimeters, just about a third or 30% of what is normal. February is really a landmark month, because where 93 millimeters would normally be experienced, we only got 26 millimeters. And when we looked at the data that we received for the month of February, looking at the period from October to February, we saw that this was probably cumulatively the amount of rainfall was the lowest that we had ever seen in Jamaica, as far as our records indicated. So we have been really in a severe drought situation, and this has been replicated throughout the Caribbean, where most of our countries have been experiencing severely low rainfall than is normal, and so they've had to do whatever is necessary to ensure that the population is well served. I commend all those who are in Jamaica here for how we've really managed it. I think that the situation could have looked a lot worse, considering the data that we actually have received that shows how critical the situation was. And I think we have been doing very well. For March, we saw quite a bit of a rebound, as I said, where 88 millimeters would normally be experienced. For Jamaica, we experienced 84. So we were almost on par with what is normal for the month of March. But although it's reason to take some comfort, there is still room, some concern. So I wanted to look at the meteorological drought, because drought is predicated on a period of 2 months. We don't just look at 1 month's rainfall, but we look at a period of 2 months. So when we get rainfall in any episode, something happens and we get some rainfall, it doesn't mean that our drought is broken. It will take a lot more rainfall to ensure that we break the drought pattern, because we have to look over a period of 8 weeks before we make a determination of whether we are still experiencing drought. So the onset of the duration of a meteorological drought is determined by comparing the average rainfall over that 2-month period with the 30-year historical norms for the country. And we do that for each parish, but also for the entire country. Looking at the percentages, a very simple way of looking at it is just the percentage. If we are over 60% of normal rainfall, we do not consider that we are experiencing drought. But as soon as it falls below 60%, we say we have normal drought conditions. If it goes below 40%, we consider it severe drought conditions. And under 20% of norm, we would consider that to be extreme drought conditions. And we experienced extreme drought for much of the island going through February. As we went to March, however, we saw that some of the figures showed that there was some change. Currently, we have a number of parishes that are experiencing normal drought. So we are still experiencing drought, although some areas have been receiving some amount of rainfall. The only parish that is not considered to be experiencing a drought at all is the parish of Portland. But as we go through, we see St. Mary, as well as St. Elizabeth and Manchester, as well as Westmoreland, experiencing what we call a normal drought. And we have severe drought conditions being experienced in St. James, in Trelawney, in St. Anne, in St. Thomas, Kingston and St. Andrew, as well as St. Catherine and Clarendon. So that's where we have severe drought conditions. I hope we're all seeing that chart. So those arrows on the right, for those who are looking online, would be seeing that you have severe drought conditions. The extreme drought conditions, however, at 20%, there is no parish currently that is experiencing the extreme drought conditions. So in terms of our drought assessment for February, March, the period February, March, which as I said is a 2-month period, the averaged value for the entire island was just 60%, indicating that Jamaica experienced normal drought conditions at the end of March. This is cumulatively Jamaica. At the national level, conditions were not as dry when compared to the December, January and the January, February periods where the island experienced severe drought conditions. Kingston and St. Andrew was the only parish in this period experiencing severe drought, and 5 other parishes were experiencing normal drought, and that included St. Elizabeth, Manchester, Portland, St. Mary, and Hanover. 4 parishes have experienced varying levels of drought over the last 3 bi-monthly periods. Meanwhile, St. Elizabeth was experiencing drought conditions for the first time since May, June of 2022. And just to take a look at the outlook, because of course our concern is not so much what has happened already, but what we're expecting as we move forward. The period April to June usually marks the early wet season. May is usually the peak of our secondary rainfall season, and so we look forward to more rainfall. And you would have experienced some amount of rainfall during the month of April. The rainfall amounts are expected to increase as we go into May. If you take a look at the percentages as having been calculated, it's really even across the board, whether we'll have below normal, normal rainfall, or above normal rainfall. All of them suggesting about 33% likelihood, which means any ball could play. It could go in any direction, whether above, below, or average rainfall during the period going into June. So basically, we just have to hold strain. We've been experiencing some amount of rainfall, but it's not sure how long it will persist. The good news is that May is the secondary rainfall peak, and so we can look forward to an increase in rainfall even as we go into May of 2023. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I think now we can ask the head of the National Water Commission, Mr. Barnett, to make his presentation. Mr. Barnett, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, colleagues, members of the media. Good morning, those who are also online. I hope that I'll be very brief. There's a presentation which I'm just going to go through quickly, which really speaks to the current situation, implications for NWC, impacts, of course, but just to bring it home a little bit closer. Obviously, we would have been under restriction from Kingston and St. Andrew. And just to let you all know that even though there are rainfalls, and thanks heaven, there's some improvement, but not enough. Most of our major facilities were producing 20% at Constant Spring, 20% at Hope, and only 40% at Mona. And that is a direct relation to the amount of water that we are actually receiving at those facilities. However, as you would all know, we instituted a 12-hour, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. Regime that gives kind of a alternate supply to various sections of the city. In general, that has worked very well because while we may have some challenges sometimes, it does prove that we still were able to supply most of the city with pipe water, which is a positive. And just to elaborate a little bit on what the minister indicated, it is in fact that before we started the NRW activity, we were supplying anywhere between 40 to 50 million gallons of water per day in the city. Since the NRW activity, that has reduced down to the numbers that the minister indicated, anywhere between 34 to 36. And these numbers vary because any given month it fluctuates. But the point is, it simply means we would have been producing less and therefore extend storage even further over the period. And so while we always want to ensure our most festive period in the Jamaican agenda, which is Christmas, we don't wish to disrupt your water supply during that period. And so we were able to ensure that water supply was always in the top. But just to give you a little synopsis in terms of the corporate area, for January, we produce and distribute just about 31 million gallons of water. March, we reduced down to 30. And so far in April, we're at 28 million gallons. But again, it would give you an idea of the deficiency or the difference between normal to what we now experience. And then you will ask, if I'm producing 20% at Constant Spring, 20% at Hope, and 40% at Mona, where is the other rest of water comes from? Why it is not worse? So what we have done is reactivated some wells, Cavaliers. For those who know Marasca Road, it's that well that you'll see passing going down to Wolmer's. We would have activated Montgomery Corner. That's a well that we operate next to the public health department offices, right along again Marasca Road. We would have activated Beverly as well, and we would have reactivated Avondale well as well. In addition to that, we ensure that we are transferring no less than about 6 million gallons of water from St. Catherine through the Ryacoba system to actually augment any shortfall in supply. So, what is the impact of the recent rainfalls on our storage? I'm sure that is something that everybody would want to know. So we did in fact see some improvement at both storage facilities. At the Hermitage Dam, we move up to about 40%, 40.8, just about 41%. We had gone down to just about 30% of stored volume. And at Mona, we are just about 43% of volume. Again, most of the supply, most of the surface sources have not shown the level of improvement, even with the rainfall that we would have received, and therefore the level of rise in those facilities is a direct function of what happens within those watershed areas. Again, we don't necessarily like to just talk about Kingston and St. Andrew because NWC's operation is island-wide, and certainly we would have had challenges, as you would all be aware, in the Bounty Hall area, Wakefield well system. Most of those wells aren't able to be pumped because of the nature of the wells themselves and because of the drought. Our other major facilities, Martha Brae, Great River, are working. Bogue and St. Ann are not affected. However, our Lagwood facility that serves most of Negril and the eastern section, let's say the western section of Hanover, I was just about to confuse the direction, would have seen variability in raw water supply. We went down to about 50%. We got some rain. We went back up to about 70%, and we are just about there as it is now. So we are able to to manage things in that general area. However, most of our rural sources would have been affected. And these are discrete. Springs, in most instances, would have been affected by what we had experienced in the last few months. What is the impact on NWC's finances? Of course, with drought, increased trucking, increased costs. And so far, we would have spent close to $400 million on trucking. And again, it simply means expenditure like those will detract from other works that we would have need to do. Another feature of drought regulations is the impact on our network. And I just want to bring the awareness. It is not uncommon when you have a system with intermittent supply, which is what we have now, for there to be increased amount of breakage, leaks. So with drought, you actually are at a higher risk of more leaks, and certainly there's a probability of more theft. That's just the reality of the situation. So for us, we will continue, just to be clear, there are persons who have been asking, rain is falling, let's lift the restriction. No, the restriction will not be lifted unless we are comfortably seeing improved inflows into a reservoir, storage is at a comfortable level. So for the rest of the month and even further into May, the restrictions will still be in effect. And those will not be lifted until, as I said, there are improvements. So I echo what the minister says. We expect persons to be responsible, use water wisely. And it is not just during drought period, folks. Climate change is not about the drought. It's a continuous thing that is happening. So we need to be preserving our water resources. And I know there are calls for other source development. Yes, we are working on those, but be mindful when we work on those. Every citizen needs to be responsible, pay their bills. Pay their bills. We're not asking you no because drought is on and you get intermittent supply. But when you get it at a plenty, you need to pay your bill just the same. And that is always the challenge with our society. We like to have it, but we want it free, and we don't want to pay for it. NWC, as a self-financing entity, needs to do investment to improve services to those who are not yet served or underserved. And the only way we can make those investments is for those who are benefiting now from the service, play their part and pay their bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnett, head of the National Water Commission. We will now open the floor to questions. You know the approach where you indicate by raising your hand, and then someone will present you with a microphone. Naomi?
Hi, good morning. Alexander Scott here from Nationwide News.
Thank you, Alexander.
Hi, just two questions, really. One for you, Minister Morgan, and one for Minister Samuda. Minister Morgan, as it relates to the Vanessa Kirkland incident, just wondering if the government is looking at, pardon me if I've butchered the phrase, ex gratia payments. Wondering if they've looking to take that on board based on the comments in the public sphere. And Minister Samuda, morning.
Can I answer your question first?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I really could not answer that question. The matter is very fresh. We've heard the suggestion. Firstly, we want to express sincere condolences to the mother of Vanessa. Very tragic circumstances, and we are all praying for her strength. But I would not be able to comment on one way or the other on that matter. Minister Samuda.
Thank you. And Minister Samuda, morning again. The drought conditions, sir, the how do I phrase this? The impact on the farmers in the rural community. What do we know what the impact has been? How many farmers have been impacted, and what the mitigation process is? If I'm not mistaken, there is a water trucking scheme going on, I believe, based on the previous presentation. But is anything else in train? Thank you.
I suspect that's more of a question for Minister Pernell Charles Jr. than for me. What I do know is significant trucking efforts have been underway by RADA, by the NWC, by the municipalities as the allocations were made in February. I wouldn't be able to go into it beyond that.
Thank you, Minister. We have more questions.
Morning, Jason Cross, Jamaica Observer. This
Morning,
question
Jason.
is morning, Minister. This question is for Mr. Thompson. What's the difference with Portland and the other parishes, and why is it that it's the only parish that's not experiencing drought at this time?
Thank you for your question. Portland is really our wettest parish and has always been. The data would suggest that among all our parishes, the peak is usually in the Portland area. In recent months, though, Portland has been having much less rainfall than is usual. And so that has contributed significantly to how the entire island has been seen in terms of the experience of drought, because Portland contributes so much to the overall average. However, in recent months, because of the types of systems that affect us during this period between December and March, that's where most of the rainfall comes in the northeast of the island, and Portland is in that part of the country. So we would normally be impacted by frontal systems, and when fronts aren't close by, the rainfall tends to occur mainly in the north and the east, but primarily in the northeast of the island. So Portland gets most of the rainfall.
One more question. What's the likelihood of the other parishes experiencing extreme drought conditions going forward?
Thanks again. That is still a possibility because we are not completely out of the drought situation. Drought is still being experienced at different levels. As I mentioned in the presentation, there's an outlook that suggests that we still could have below average rainfall. And if that does occur during the course of May and going into June, which is where we normally have our secondary peak, if we don't get the rainfall that we would have wanted or expected, then it could really plunge us back into a severe situation. October last year is an example. October is our primary rainfall season, and we did not get anywhere near as much rainfall as is usual for October. If that is repeated in May, then we could be in a bad situation. You're welcome.
Thank you. Another question?
Good morning, Ministers. Sashana Small from the Jamaica Gleaner. I have a question for Minister Samuda as well as Minister Morgan. Minister Samuda, there have been calls for the government to mandate water harvesting as a way of addressing the yearly drought. Is this a suggestion that the government is willing to consider?
Water harvesting is going to play a critical role in building Jamaica's water resilience going forward. It is already a facet of much of Jamaica. Certainly in southern St. Elizabeth, it is commonplace. The country is nearing completion on its guidelines, which would be gazetted on rainwater harvesting, which would provide guidance to planning authorities and developers alike. We expect that those guidelines to be complete within the next 30 to 60 days, and then the appropriate sensitization to be done with all of our planning officers. The issue related to rainwater harvesting and things of like solar panels, just for argument's sake, has always been in the context of a housing crisis in Jamaica. Anything that you insist upon that increases the cost of housing, there's always been a general sensitivity to this space. Acknowledging where we are with the changing climate, rainwater harvesting is something that the government intends to do through its public buildings. It's something that the government intends to do in all areas where the utility footprint does not extend to, and it is something that the government will be encouraging significantly.
Just not mandating.
Not at this stage, no.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you,
Minister
Minister.
Morgan, civil society groups as well as the Minister of Opposition, Julian Robinson, have excuse me, suggested that the meetings of the Constitutional Reform Committee be made public. Is this something that the government intends to consider?
I'm trying to. So, in principle, there is nothing really fundamentally wrong with public engagement with the Constitutional Reform Committee. I am aware that even up to this evening, the Reform Committee will be having a public meeting in the western end of the island. I would like to use PostCab as a free plug for the meeting. And it's called Road to Republic Public Consultation, Wednesday, April 26th at 4:30 p.m. at the Civic Center, Sam Sharp Square, Montego Bay. And the topic is phase 1 of the reform process. There is no interest in hiding anything from the people. The mere process of constitutional reform requires the public to make the decision. So the public is the one who is going to decide what we do. However, there are processes such as the drafting of bills that require discussion and dialogue with opposition, with others, and I know that there has been attempts to engage with the civil society groups and so on. So there's absolutely no fear or no. Sometimes I'm a bit fascinated listening to the conversations because the constitutional reform process is a public process. There has to be a referendum to determine whether we move from a constitutional monarchy to a republic. And you cannot go out and do a referendum without public education, without advising people as to what it means to become a republic. But we're at the beginning stage of the process. We're now at a stage where the opposition and a wide cross-section of persons are sitting around the table looking at the sticky, legalistic issues to condense them and to mold them in a way that when they do go out into the public, there's a clear explanation to the public as to this is what the country is proposing. Do you agree with it? So there is no desire. It's impossible to not have a public engagement in a constitutional reform process. Impossible.
Thank you, Minister. We have another question.
Morning, Hal Shaneberg, Radio Jamaica.
Morning, Hashin.
Minister, since you have opened the door to the CRC, let me just jump on. The NIA, National Integrity Action, has said that the process that is being taken is one where it is being foisted upon the people and the choices are limited and the people are going to be asked to simply rubber stamp what the CRC, the committee, has determined that is the way forward, rather than asking the people what's the way forward. What's your take?
You see, I don't know how to answer the question because the question is based on a false premise. We cannot draft a bill in Sam Sharp Square. A bill requires discussion, consultation with numerous groups, including the public. But a bill has to be drafted. We've been in this process for decades. We've had constitutional reform consultations, committees stretching back for as long as I am alive, and I am 40. There is no desire by the government we cannot turn Jamaica into a republic in secret, you know. The question that is going to be asked of the people is simply, should we become a republic or should we remain a constitutional monarchy? That is what the government committed to doing. the main argument that has been made by many persons over the years is, why are we not a republic? Why are we taking so long? I know that we have started the process. People are saying, why are you moving so fast? How do you respond to that? Other than to do what the minister is doing by going to St. James today to have public consultations, to explain to people what the process is, why we're doing what we're doing, answer some of the difficult questions that the public has. And we will be doing many, many more town halls and public consultations all across the island over the next couple of weeks. The minister has been on the radio. She has been on all angles on your station, I believe, answering the tough questions. So too has Donna Scott Motley been on public radio. That is consultation. Listening to what the public is saying and responding, and then at the same time, creating events where the public can speak. We are going to become a republic, and we're going to do it as quickly as we can, but in consultation with the people. We're not going to delay another 40 years. That's what we're doing. Thank you.
All right, question for, I think, Mr. Barnett. You mentioned you encourage persons to pay their bills. What's the rate of delinquency that you are seeing? And also, what is the state of the work on Spanish Town Road?
Yes. Good question. I'll just answer you this way. For any given month, we don't collect at least 15% of the revenue we bill. So it gives you an idea that if I bill the general customer base $2 billion, 15% of that is not collected. Now, we would want to be anywhere between 95. That's where a good performing utility from a commercial perspective would like to see their collection on a monthly basis. With respect to work on Spanish Town Road, the major aspect of the work, meaning pipeline, etc., is completed. One of the things that you will find whenever time NWC install a new water supply system or replace an existing one, we go through the painstaking process of ensuring only legitimate persons get connected to that system. So if you see any delay in terms of excavation on the sidewalk, that is what we're doing. So we're not reconnecting anyone that is not legitimate or any supply that we don't know where it goes. So those are some of the things that we do. Just want to raise something which I was just discussing with the minister. So there is this, NWC, as you know, would have procured upwards of $1 billion, $1.3 billion worth of various pipes for various projects. I just want to highlight a few things. Number one, those pipes were nationally tendered in a competitive process. So if there is any suggestion that there is any wholesale singular selection of any supplier, it is false. And I would hope that you, the news media, would share that positive word. Everything went through the procurement process, and these procurements are monitored by the Integrity Commission from day one. Just to note, it's good that we have been able to publicize this investment, but the fact is, these pipes should have been here from 2021. COVID, issues in the manufacturer's jurisdiction, and other raw material issues would have caused significant delays in the receipt of these pipes. So just to clarify that issue, which seems to be taking the rounds in social media once and for all. All right?
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. I believe then we will have our final two questions to either Minister Morgan or Minister Samuda. Let's start with from Nationwide, and then we end with the Gleaner.
Thank you. Minister Morgan, hi again. I just, sorry, I'm just bringing this up. And yeah, following the summit in Trinidad, the anti-crime, the anti-gang, the Get the Guns Summit, the Crime Summit. Thank you. In Trinidad, I just wanted to know what further steps are being taken or considered by either the Jamaican government or governments regionally to both stem the flow from private individuals, but more importantly, to pressure the United States itself to restrict the outflow of guns, because in the grand scheme of things, I think one of the prime ministers had mentioned it, that nothing can really be done unless the tap is turned off at the governmental level in the US. So just wanted to know if anything's being done in that end. Thank you.
Really, thank you. Last week, you guys asked about water. Minister came and gave a very good presentation. Minister Chang, Dr. Chang, gave a presentation yesterday, and that's a very important question that you asked, which requires good detailed response. And he will be here next week, Wednesday at 8:30 a.m., where he will be answering that exact question. Thank you very much.
All right, our final question this morning.
Morning again, Minister. Have discussions started to determine at what levels on the new compensation review salary scale ministers of government, MPs, and councillors will be paid?
I have
And
no idea. I've not had
No
any
idea of that?
discussions about that. Don't know anything about that. I'm sorry. I have to go deep in the archives.
Well, I have two other questions.
We're running out of
has-
time, though. But go ahead.
Has Minister Johnson Smith been served with papers in the lawsuit filed by?
Not that I'm aware of. I
Okay.
saw a press release on Sunday, I think, from her representatives that she has not been served, based on the last information that I have.
Another question. Why is the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee proposing an in-camera meeting when the matter of its operation has been a
I
public
do not know.
concern?
I'm not on the committee. You'd have to speak to the chairman of the committee, Mr. I think it's Minister Bartlett. I am not on that committee. I wasn't even aware of the fullness of what you're saying. So, yeah. And I think that is. Do you have another one?
Well, this question is from Mr. Samudo.
Oh, okay. So we can close with that one.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, Minister.
All
Samuel.
right. Mr. Samuda, the government drew down on Windalco environmental bond. The NWC was to receive a portion of it. Can you remind us of how much was it received, and would consumers be feeling any of the benefits as they would have been affected during this time?
So the bond was 771,000 US, which I believe at the exchange rate of the day during that incident would have been approximately 117 million Jamaican dollars. In sticking to the terms of the bond, NWC was to receive 40 million Jamaican dollars. In the context of the NWC balance sheet annually, that wouldn't affect either costs to consumers or create any benefit in that space. The NWC is an entity that generally earns, for round number sake, $3 billion a month. It's a $36 to $38 billion company a year. $40 million is not a material drawdown that would change. It would be a single project in any at a community level. It wouldn't. It's not something that would be felt nationally, quite frankly. All right.
Want to thank. I know we had a rough morning with the traffic and all of that. Several accidents delayed some of our attendees, but we're happy that members of the media, as well as members of the Met Service, the National Water Commission, and also Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, the Honorable Matthew Samuda, was able to join us. Also, thanks to our support staff here at OPM, thanks to JIS and also PBCJ. And most importantly, thanks to everyone who is online listening and sending their comments. We really appreciate you. There we go for another edition of Post-Cabinet Press Briefing. Next week, we will have Minister of National Security, Dr. Horace Chang, who will be with us here to give a presentation and answer the relevant questions. Until then, thank you very much. May you have a safe and prosperous afternoon.